guys, and welcome back to my channel. So very recently I had somebody comment on one of my videos asking about my favorite psychological thrillers. And I kind of thought to myself, I don't really think I read that many psychological thrillers to make like a definitive list on it. And then I went back and looked at a lot of the like non-supernatural horror stories that I read and realized a lot of them kind of do actually fall into that category. So today I'm putting together a list of my, I think, personal favorite psychological thrillers. This really isn't in any particular order except for the first one. The first one is without a doubt my favorite psychological thriller of all time because it's one of my favorite books of all time. But yeah, the rest of it is just kind of books that I've really enjoyed. A lot of them are very horror adjacent, but I tried to make sure that none of them had anything supernatural in it. And yeah, that they are some kind of element of mystery or twist or that you do not see coming. Kind of like crime thrillery, kind of detective-y. Not all of them fit that, but that is what I wanted for this list. So not 100% psychological thriller, but adjacent enough. And still very close to the horror world. So first up, I obviously had to include Chestnut Man by Soren Sveistrup. This was a complete cover buy. I knew nothing about this book when I saw it in Politics and Prose, of my favorite bookstore in DC. And I just kind of bought it because it kind of reminded me of fall, and it was on like a recommendations table, and it has easily become one of my favorite books ever written. There's an amazing Netflix series. It's a very loyal adaptation to this book. Soren Sveistrup is actually a screenwriter, so he did actually help write the show, so it is very true and loyal to the book, and it is absolutely fantastic. But I do highly recommend reading this before watching, just because there's way more detail in this story than there is in the show, even though it's, I think, like an 8-part hour-long episode each TV show. But I'm gonna read the back of the book real quick. A psychopath is terrorizing Copenhagen. His calling card is Chestnut Man, a handmade doll composed of matchsticks and 2 chestnuts, which he weaves at each bloody crime scene. Examining the dolls, forensics makes a shocking discovery. A fingerprint belonging to a young girl, a government minister's daughter who had been kidnapped and murdered a year ago. A tragic coincidence, or something more twisted? To save innocent lives, a pair of detectives must put aside their differences to piece together the Chestnut Man's gruesome clues, because it's clear that the madman is on a mission that is far from over, and no one is safe. This is my favorite twist, I think, in pretty much any, like, crime mystery book I've ever read, because I didn't see it coming. The killer is right in front of you the entire time and you don't realize it, and it's not something that kind of comes out of nowhere and then when you look back on it you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's so well crafted that when the reveal happens and everything clicks into place, you're just stunned that you didn't see it before. And I absolutely loved it. The characters in this, there's so much drama, there's so much humanity, there's so much believability in this story, which I just absolutely adore. And I read the whole thing in like 3 days. I literally couldn't put it down. It's like 500 pages, and I read the last like 200 pages in literally one sitting. So one of my favorite books ever. If you haven't read it, highly recommend it. I do have a whole in-depth review on this one. It's actually one of my most watched book review videos, I think, because I talk about this book so often. So definitely want to recommend that you guys check that out. Alright, next up, I actually spoke about this in a recent video as well, but this is Dark Across the Bay by Anya Ahlborn. As you guys know, Anya Ahlborn writes a lot of familial horror, basically horror related to the family unit and trust and distrust within the family unit. I really like this one because this is one of her few novels that isn't supernatural, and unlike Brother, which is another one of her non-supernatural books, this one I think is a little bit more in the realm of could actually probably happen. Brother is definitely like her homage to like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of style of story. This one is more of a family trip gone wrong, a kind of home invasion story, I would say, is the best way to say it. This is not a supernatural story. It does hint at supernatural elements, but there aren't any in the end, which is very cool. And I just think that this is a really strong showing from Anya Ahlborn. It's not my favorite of her books by far, but it's definitely one that I really enjoyed, and the ending is really sad. Like, Anya Ahlborn is so pivotal for having these really tragic endings to her stories, and this one really is like a kind of gut punch in what happens, but I do think it's also a very well crafted story with very interesting concepts on the home invasion and a very interesting motivation behind it. I'm going to read the inside flap. The house sits stoic and slightly askew off the coast of Ravenshead. Its off-kilter windows are both charming and disorienting, its walls of overstuffed bookshelves both comforting and claustrophobic. When Leo and Lark Parrish arrive at their vacation home with their parents, their mother's idea of a quintessential Maine getaway seems like both a blessing and a curse. Lark, a novice novelist, can't wait to find inspiration at the end of a fog-entombed pier. She'll forgive her mother for forcing her into this non-negotiable holiday, but only if she can find her muse among a lapping rocky shore. And while being trapped in a house with no means of escape is the last thing Leo would consider a good time, especially with parents on the precipice of divorce, he can't help but wonder if maybe the change of scenery will help him shake off the chains of sadness brought on by the death of his closest friend. But what starts off as a relatively benign family trip quickly turns menacing. Leo finds himself face to face with what feels like his best friend reaching out from beyond the grave, and only hours after they arrive, Lark begins to receive sinister text, and then they both see it. Someone lurking in the shadows of their rental home. Someone who has been expecting them despite the Parrishes being 1,000 miles from home. I really enjoyed the twist in this book. Like the Chestnut Man, this is a twist that is really laid out through the entirety of the novel, and when it happens, everything does click into place. Everything is interconnected. Very, very, very well crafted, like kind of behind the scenes twisting moment that comes to the forefront at the end. It explains just about everything that you had a question about. So I really, really love this. Anya's attention to detail in this book, I think, is absolutely top notch, and it's a really, really chilling read. Unfortunately, don't ever read that if you're at an Airbnb. I will say that. Okay, next up, I had to put a Tana French on here. I was really torn between The Searcher and In the Woods. But I found The Searcher to be a much more satisfying novel for me. I felt like In the Woods left me with a lot of questions that I was a little let down about. The Searcher, however, is a much slower burn of a book. You really, really have to take your time with it, but I do think that the payoff is there. This is less of a thrilling psychological tale and more of a slow unraveling of a mystery. I really, really enjoy it. It's set in the Irish countryside, and I just think it's a really, really beautiful, beautiful book. But that being said, it is not fast-paced whatsoever. The payoff, again, is very satisfying, and it is worth it, but it does take quite a while to get there. So it says, Cal Hooper thought a fixer-upper in the remote Irish village would be the perfect escape. After 25 years in the Chicago police force and a bruising divorce, he wants just to build a new life in a pretty spot with a good pub where nothing much happens. But when a local kid whose brother has gone missing arm twists him into investigating, Cal discovers that even in the most idyllic small town, dangerous secrets lie hidden, and trouble can come calling at his door. If you want something a little bit more fast-paced, definitely check out In the Woods. I'm currently reading The Witch Elm. I've been reading The Witch Elm for like ever. It's another very, very slow burn from Tana French, but I do think that this one really, out of all of them, is my favorite thus far. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how much of a slow burn this is. This is not going to be a novel for everybody, but I did really, really enjoy my time with it. It's not that long. It's like 450 pages, so it's a good chunk of time, but it definitely took me longer to read than most like crime thriller books, just because you really have to take that step back and like indulge yourself in this kind of slow-paced rural town. However, it is a very good telling of small-town horror. Again, very much rooted in believability, and there are some really cool twists in here that I did not see coming, and when they happened, I was like, oh, wow, okay, that kind of makes sense, but didn't expect that at all, which is not something I was really expecting from something that was such a slow burn. But I did really, really, really love and enjoy reading this book. Okay, next up, I had to put Silence of the Lambs on this list, because would this be a psychological thriller list if Silence of the Lambs isn't on it? I will say, personally, I have read Dragon, the first book in the Hannibal Lecter series, rated higher than Silence of the Lambs, just because I had never seen that film or watched the TV show before I read Dragon. So to me, that was like being taken on a completely new journey, whereas Silence of the Lambs is basically word for word the film adaptation, and I'm not saying that that's bad, but there was nothing in here that really surprised me because a lot of it was just a story that I knew. However, I do think that in the end this is the superior story, which is why this one is on the list and not Red Dragon, but I highly recommend reading both because they are both very, very, very good and very, very, very creepy. I'm going to read the inside flap just in case somebody here has not read Silence of the Lambs or seen the movie. A serial murderer, known only by a grotesquely apt nickname, Buffalo Bill, is stalking particular women. He has a purpose, but no one can fathom it, for the bodies are discovered in different states. Clarice Starling, a young trainee at the FBI Academy, is surprised to be summoned by Jack Crawford, chief of the Bureau's Behavioral Science Section. Her assignment to interview Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychiatrist and grisly killer now kept under close watch in the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Lecter's insight into the minds of murderers could help track and capture Buffalo Bill. Smart and attractive, Starling is shaken to find herself in a strange, intense relationship with the acutely perceptive Lecter. His cryptic clues about Buffalo Bill and about her launch Clarice on a search that every reader will find startling, harrowing, and totally compelling. An ingenious, masterfully written novel, The Silence of the Lambs is a classic of suspense and storytelling. And it is. Hannibal Lecter is a truly incredible character. And then obviously reading Red Dragon and just seeing kind of how Jack and Will and Hannibal still kind of carry over into this story, I think is fantastic. It is interesting to me that this is the one that they chose to adapt first as a film. Again, I do think this is the superior story, but Red Dragon truly is also an amazing, amazing read with a crazy twist. This one, the twist I think is done pretty well in the film adaptation. And twist is not necessarily the word I would use, but just the way that the writing is crafted and the scenes are crafted and what it makes you as a reader believe is going on, I think is really, really, really well done. So always have to include Silence of the Lambs. One other classic on this list here, and I'm going to pull it out right now. Ooh, big black book. Let's see what it is. And this is Misery. This is my Folio Society edition of Misery. I absolutely adore this story. I love this book, so I had to buy this edition, which is just like, it's got these illustrations in it, and it's just so beautifully, beautifully done. And here we have Annie Wilkes. They definitely tried to make her look a little bit like Kathy Bates for sure in this, based off of the also Oscar award-winning film. Both Silence of the Lambs and Misery are Oscar award-winning horror films, so that's kind of awesome. But again, we have Misery. I don't think there's a little inside flap on my special edition for you guys for me to read. I'm going to read the synopsis from Goodreads for this. I understand most people probably understand the plot of Misery, but just in case there's somebody on my channel who has never actually heard about the premise of Misery, I'm going to read that for them. So it says, Paul Sheldon. He's a best-selling novelist who has finally met his biggest fan. Her name is Annie Wilkes, and she is more than a rabid reader. She is Paul's nurse, tending his shattered body after an automobile accident. She is also his captor, keeping him prisoner in her isolated house. It was originally written to be a Richard Bachman book, and it was slated to come out under the Richard Bachman name. However, Stephen King was outed as Richard Bachman right before the release of this book, so they did release it under Stephen King's name. In case you don't know, Richard Bachman is the pseudonym, the pen name that Stephen King would use when trying to see if people were buying his books because he was a good writer or because it had his name attached to it, and he would only write like non-supernatural style stories. So he did The Long Walk, Rage, I believe The Running Man, it was supposed to be Misery, and a few others. And I think Misery benefited so much from being released under the Stephen King name because it did skyrocket into popularity. We did get the amazing film with Kathy Bates. She did win the Oscar for her performance. She's incredible in it. And it is one of the most terrifying books that I have ever read. There isn't a single element of supernatural in this story. It is primarily the tale of a super fan, a stan, if you will, kidnapping her favorite author and forcing him to continue writing a series of books in the style that she wants and in a way that she sees fitting for the characters, and how she basically tortures him doing so and him trying to escape the entire time. It is a fantastic book. It is so creepy. It is so claustrophobic. It is so suspenseful. And again, it is really just two people primarily in one room of a house for the entirety of the book, and yet it had me on the edge of my seat. I was completely terrified. I think Annie Wilkes is one of the most scary characters that Stephen King has ever written, and to this day, I think it's one of the scariest books I have ever read, and definitely one of the scariest non-supernatural stories I have ever read. So I highly, highly, highly recommend Misery if you haven't read it. It's definitely one of those Stephen King books that is absolutely worth the hype. I have two more books. So next up I have December Park by Ronald Malfi. This is another one of my all-time favorite books. I think this book is absolutely brilliant. This is kind of marketed more as a coming-of-age story. I don't know if I would call it a horror story. Ronald Malfi is primarily a horror author, but this is very a suspenseful, psychological kind of who is the killer mystery. And I love the reveal at the end of it. I think the reveal just adds to the metaphor of the concept of a coming of age story. When you read it as a very like blunt, this is a serial killer story, the reveal to you might not be the most satisfying thing in the world at face value, but I think in context of the metaphor that this book sets up, it is very, very, very perfect as a conclusion. So just know that going in. I know a lot of people have some issues with the ending of this book, but I personally think it to be fantastic. So it says, in the fall of 1993, the quiet suburb of Harding Farms is shocked when children begin to vanish, and one is found dead near December Park, a great sweeping expanse that is sunken below the streets and surrounded on three sides by vast woodlands, a place children believe is haunted. Newspapers call the abductor the Piper because he has come to lead children away, while kids whisper darker names for him in school halls. Angelo Mazzone and his friend discover a link to the dead girl and take up the search for the killer, vowing to stop the Piper's reign of terror. Their teenage pledge becomes a journey of self-discovery and odyssey into the darkness of their own hometown, hell on earth. Yeah, this is an amazing, amazing, amazing read, especially for the summer. It really captures 90s nostalgia. And again, I love the concept of doing a crime thriller through the traditional coming of age, like Stand By Me, It kind of Stephen King style lens. And I think it's just a fantastic read. It's a book I will always, always, always recommend on my channel. It's up there with The Chestnut Man. It's just one of my favorite things that I've ever read. And so I highly recommend reading that. It should have recently been reprinted. It was kind of out of publication for a while, but there's been a kind of a growing demand with Ronald Malfi, so I'm fairly certain it is back on the market. So definitely, if you can get your hands on it, highly recommend December Park. Okay, and last but not least, this was so hard for me to choose which Riley Sager novel to put on this list. I pretty much could have put almost all of them. I love The Only One Left. I love Home Before Dark. I love the most recent book that I read from him, Middle of the Night. I actually think that might be the best book he's written thus far, but I just did a whole video review on it, so I didn't want to include this on this list, just so you guys are exposed to more Riley Sager books. So I chose The Last Time I Lied because this is the first Riley Sager book that I ever read, and this is the book that got me into Sager's work because the ending that just comes seemingly out of nowhere was so mind-bogglingly brilliant in my mind and blindsided me with a twist I didn't even know was coming. That I was just like, who is this author? I want to read him forever. Read the back of the book. So it says, 2 truths and a lie. Vivian, Natalie, Allison, and Emma played it all the time at Camp Nightingale. But the games ended the night Emma sleepily watched the others sneak out of the cabin into the darkness. The last she, or anyone, saw of them was Vivian closing the cabin door, hushing Emma with a finger pressed to her lips. Now a rising star in the New York art scene, Emma turns her past into paintings. Massive canvases filled with dark, gnarled branches that covered ghostly shapes in white dresses. When the paintings catch the attention of the wealthy owner of Camp Nightingale, Francesca implores Emma to return to the newly reopened camp as an art instructor. Wouldn't she like to put the past to rest? Familiar faces in the same dark lake haunt Nightingale, where Emma is even assigned to the same cabin she slept in 15 years ago. But not everything is the same. The only security camera is pointed directly at Emma's door, and long-hidden cryptic clues that Vivian left behind begin to surface. Soon, Emma finds herself sorting through lies from the past while facing mysterious threats in the present. And the closer she gets to the truth about Camp Nightingale, the more she realizes that closure can come at a deadly price. This is really fun. This takes the kind of trope of like teenagers at summer camp a la Friday the 13th and things go awry and puts it into a more realistic depiction of what could actually happen. I really, really loved this story. Again, this is the book that got me into Riley Sager. Well, I don't think it's his best work because a lot of the stuff that he has written recently I do think is stronger. I do think this is an incredibly strong story and a really, really, really good introduction into the style of writing that Riley Sager does. He's very good at making you think something supernatural might be happening and then kind of sweeping it aside and being like, haha, it was real and rooted in reality all along. He does that in almost every single one of his books, and I absolutely adore it. I think he's a fantastic writer, and if you just want to binge read really fun, twisty, over-the-top psychological thrillers, Riley Sager is your author. Anyway, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays, and if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I'll catch you on the next one. Mwah.